The A3 highway, cutting through the heart of England, is more than just a road. It's a path steeped in dark history, known to locals as the Devil's Highway. Over the years, it has gained a sinister reputation, with an unsettling number of accidents and inexplicable disappearances happening along its stretch. According to recent statistics, the A3 has seen more fatal accidents in the last decade than any other major road in the region. But what the numbers don't tell you is the fear that grips those who travel this road at night. There's a story that everyone in the nearby towns knows, a story of the wandering spirits that haunt the A3. Many believe that these lost souls are the victims of the road, people who met their tragic end here and never found peace. It's said that on foggy nights, when the moon is hidden behind thick clouds, you can hear the faint whispers of the ghosts calling out to the living, seeking justice, or perhaps a companion to join them in their eternal misery. But these are just stories, right? Tales told to keep children from wandering too far from home, or to explain the unexplainable. Yet, every so often, a traveler goes missing, or a driver is found dead behind the wheel, eyes wide open in terror. And the stories start all over again. The A3 is not just a highway, it's a place where the line between the living and the dead is perilously thin. This is the tale of one such night, a night when the spirits of the Devil's Highway made their presence known in the most terrifying way. A group of unsuspecting teenagers, out for a night of fun, would soon discover that some roads are better left untraveled. The night was still young when 5 friends, Jake, Emily, Sarah, Tom, and Lisa, decided to take a late-night drive along the A3. They had heard the rumors, of course, but to them, the stories were just that, stories. After all, they were teenagers, invincible in their own minds. And what better way to spend a Friday night than testing their courage on the infamous Devil's Highway? The car sped along the winding road, headlights cutting through the thickening fog. The radio played softly in the background, a mix of pop songs and static as the signal struggled to reach the more isolated parts of the highway. Inside the car, laughter filled the air, as the group shared spooky tales they had heard from older siblings or seen in horror movies. The idea of ghosts and haunted roads was thrilling, but not something any of them truly believed in. "Have you guys heard about the ghost of the hitchhiker?" Jake asked, trying to keep a straight face as he recounted the well-known urban legend. "They say she appears right in the middle of the road, and if you don't stop, she'll haunt you forever." "Oh, come on, Jake," Emily scoffed, rolling her eyes. "That's just a stupid story. We're not going to see any ghosts tonight." "Yeah, and even if we do, they'll probably just ask for a lift," Tom joked, earning a round of giggles from the others. But as they continued down the road, the atmosphere inside the car slowly began to change. The fog grew thicker, wrapping around the vehicle like a shroud. The laughter faded, replaced by a tense silence as each of them felt a growing unease, though none wanted to admit it. The road seemed endless, stretching out into the darkness with no sign of another car in sight. The trees on either side loomed closer, their branches casting eerie shadows that danced in the fog. The temperature inside the car dropped, and Lisa shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "Is it just me? Or does this place feel different?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, like we're not alone," Tom agreed, glancing nervously at the road ahead. Emily laughed, though the sound was hollow. "You guys are just trying to freak me out." But deep down, they all felt the sense that something was watching them, waiting just beyond the reach of the headlights. The stories they had laughed at earlier didn't seem so funny anymore. There was something wrong with the A3 that night, something they couldn't quite explain, but could no longer ignore. As they pressed on, the sense of unease grew stronger, and the realization began to dawn on them that they might have made a terrible mistake coming here. The Devil's Highway was more than just a name, it was a warning, one they were starting to wish they had heeded. The thrill of the drive quickly faded as the group found themselves deeper into the heart of the Devil's Highway. The fog thickened, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of them, as if they were driving in circles. What started as an adventurous night out was beginning to feel like a mistake, a very dangerous mistake. Tom, who was behind the wheel, glanced nervously at the fuel gauge. "We're running low on gas," he muttered, breaking the uneasy silence that had fallen over the group. "We should have filled up before we left." "Don't worry," Jake said, trying to sound reassuring, though his voice wavered slightly. There's gotta be a gas station around here somewhere. But as they continued to drive, there was no sign of a gas station or any sign of civilization at all. The road was eerily empty, with no other cars, no street lights, and not a single building in sight. The fog pressed in on them, reducing their visibility to just a few feet ahead. It was as if they had entered another world, a world that existed solely within the confines of the A3 highway. This place is seriously creeping me out. But when Tom tried to find a spot to turn around, they realized something even more disturbing. There was no place to turn. "I don't like this," Emily whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "This isn't normal. Roads don't just do this." Sarah nodded, clutching her phone tightly in her hand. "There's no signal?" she said, her voice trembling. "I've been trying to call for help, but there's nothing." Panic started to set in. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They were lost, trapped on a road that didn't seem to have an end, with no way to contact anyone or find their way back. The legends they had laughed at earlier now seemed terrifyingly real. "Okay, everyone just calm down," Jake said, though he was clearly struggling to stay composed. "We need to keep moving. There has to be a way out of here." But the more they drove, the worse things became. The fog seemed to grow denser with every passing minute, and strange noises began to echo through the trees, whispers that seemed to come from all directions at once. Shadows flickered in the corners of their vision, darting between the trees and across the road, disappearing before they could be sure they had seen anything at all. What was that?" Tom stammered as he slammed on the brakes, causing the car to skid slightly on the damp road. The group fell silent, their eyes wide as they stared into the darkness ahead. Something had moved in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, standing motionless in the middle of the road. For a moment, no one spoke. No one breathed. The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to notice the car. Then, without warning, it vanished, dissolving into the fog as if it had never been there at all. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said urgently, her voice shaking. Now, Tom pressed down on the accelerator, but the car sputtered and lurched forward sluggishly. The engine was dying. They were running out of gas, and with it, their chances of escape. Come on, Tom muttered under his breath, but it was no use. The car coasted to a stop, the engine giving one final sputter before falling silent. The group sat in stunned silence, the reality of their situation crashing down on them. They were stranded on the Devil's Highway, surrounded by fog and darkness, with no way to escape and no one to call for help. And somewhere out there, in the shadows and the mist, something was watching them. The night seemed to close in around them as they sat in the stalled car, surrounded by the thick fog that clung to the A3 highway like a shroud. The only sound was the faint ticking of the cooling engine, but even that was quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence. The friends exchanged nervous glances, their earlier bravado now completely gone. "What do we do now?" Lisa asked, her voice barely a whisper. The fear in her eyes was mirrored in everyone else's. "We can't just sit here," Jake said, his tone laced with anxiety. "We need to find help." "But where?" Emily retorted, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "We're in the middle of nowhere, on a haunted road, with no gas and no signal." Tom took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "There's gotta be something up ahead. Maybe a house or a gas station. We can't be that far from civilization." Sarah nodded, though she didn't look convinced. "We should stick together, though. No splitting up. We need to stay close." Reluctantly, the group climbed out of the car, the cold night air immediately chilling them to the bone. The fog was so dense that it was difficult to see more than a few feet in any direction, and the road ahead seemed to disappear into an impenetrable wall of white. The only light came from the car's dim headlights, casting eerie shadows that danced in the mist. "Let's go," Tom said, leading the way with his phone's flashlight. The others followed closely, their footsteps echoing on the asphalt, the only sound in the unnerving silence. They walked for what felt like hours, the fog growing thicker with every step, until they could barely see the road beneath their feet. The air was heavy with moisture, making it difficult to breathe, and the cold seemed to seep into their bones. Every now and then, they would hear something distant, whispers, the crunch of gravel underfoot when no one was moving. or the rustling of leaves in the trees, but when they looked around, there was nothing to see. "Are we sure this is the right way?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "It feels like we're going in circles." "We don't have much of a choice," Jake replied, though he sounded as uncertain as she did. "We have to keep moving." But as they continued, strange things began to happen. The fog started to play tricks on their minds. Shapes and figures appeared in the mist, only to vanish the moment they tried to focus on them. The road itself seemed to twist and turn in ways that defied logic, looping back on itself or leading to dead ends that hadn't been there before. At one point, they stumbled upon a side road that they could have sworn hadn't been there a moment ago. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a car, and lined with ancient, gnarled trees that seemed to lean in towards the road as if trying to block it off. "Should we take it?" Emily asked, eyeing the dark path with trepidation. "I don't know," Tom replied, hesitating. "But staying on the main road doesn't seem to be getting us anywhere." With a collective nod, they turned onto the side road, their footsteps now muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves that covered the ground. The trees closed in around them, their branches intertwining above, blocking out what little moonlight managed to penetrate the fog. The air here was different, heavier, colder, and filled with the scent of damp earth and decay. As they walked, the whispers grew louder, more distinct, though still unintelligible. It was as if a crowd of invisible people was surrounding them, speaking in hushed tones, their words just out of reach. The shadows, too, seemed to move on their own, darting between the trees, watching the group with unseen eyes. Then, without warning, they heard it, a soft, mournful cry, like that of a child lost in the woods. It came from up ahead, faint at first but growing louder as they continued down the path. The sound sent shivers down their spines, but they couldn't turn back now. They had to see what it was. The cry led them to a small clearing, where the trees parted to reveal an old, dilapidated house. Its windows were dark, and the wood was rotting away, but it stood eerily intact, as if it had been waiting for them. The crying stopped the moment they laid eyes on the house, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to weigh down on them. "Do we go inside?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "We have to," Jake said, though the fear in his voice was unmistakable. "There might be someone inside who can help." But as they approached the house, the door slowly creaked open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness within. The group hesitated, glancing at each other with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew that whatever was inside, it was their only chance of finding answers, or at least a way out of this nightmare. They stepped inside, one by one, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was musty and stale, filled with the scent of decay. The floorboards creaked under their weight, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper and mold. But the most unsettling thing was the feeling that they were not alone, that something was watching them from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they explored the house, they found signs that it had once been lived in: old furniture covered in dust, family photos faded with time, and toys scattered across the floor. But there was no sign of life, no indication that anyone had been here for years. Yet, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger, and the whispers followed them from room to room, growing louder and more insistent. In one of the rooms, they found an old journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Sarah picked it up, her hands trembling as she opened it to the first page. The writing was faded, but still legible, and it told the story of a family that had once lived in the house, a family that had disappeared without a trace one fateful night. The last entry was the most chilling. "They come at night, from the fog. We can hear them whispering, calling out to us. We tried to leave, but the road, it's not there anymore. We're trapped. God help us." As Sarah read the words aloud, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights and plunging them into darkness. The door slammed shut, and the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, surrounding them, filling their ears with unintelligible words. Panic set in as they realized that the spirits of the house were not just echoes of the past, they were very real. And they were angry. In the pitch-black darkness, the group clung to each other, their hearts racing as the sound of footsteps echoed through the house. Something was coming for them, something that had been waiting in the shadows all along, and there was no way out. The darkness in the old house was suffocating, a void so complete that it swallowed all light and hope. The friends huddled together, their breaths coming in shallow, panicked gasps as the footsteps grew louder, echoing through the empty halls. Whatever was coming for them, it wasn't human, it was something far more sinister, something born of the nightmares that haunted the Devil's Highway. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying, a silence so deep that it pressed down on them like a physical weight. For a brief, terrible moment, they thought it might be over, that whatever had been stalking them had decided to leave them alone. But then, a voice cut through the darkness, soft and cold, like a whisper carried on a frozen wind. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice seemed to come from all directions at once, surrounding them, filling their minds with dread. It was the voice of a woman, but there was something wrong with it, something ancient and malicious that sent chills down their spines. "We have to get out of here," Jake whispered, his voice trembling with fear. But as they turned to flee, the door they had entered through slammed shut with a deafening crash, locking them inside. Panic took hold as they fumbled in the dark, trying to find a way out. But every door they tried was locked, every window sealed shut. It was as if the house itself had come alive, trapping them within its decaying walls. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by faint, ghostly figures that flitted through the darkness, barely visible, yet unmistakably there. In the chaos, Lisa stumbled and fell, her scream cut short as a cold, invisible hand closed around her ankle, dragging her across the floor. The others watched in horror, unable to move, as she was pulled into the shadows, her terrified cries fading into the distance. "Lisa!" Sarah screamed, but it was too late. Lisa was gone, swallowed by the darkness. "Run!" Tom shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her towards the staircase. The others followed, their only thought to escape, to get as far away from the malevolent spirits as possible. They raced up the stairs, their footsteps pounding against the creaking wood, the sound echoing through the house like the beating of a frantic heart. But the house was a maze, its corridors twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. No matter which direction they ran, they always seemed to end up back where they started, the doors slamming shut behind them, trapping them in an endless loop of terror. Finally, they burst into the attic, slamming the door behind them. The small, cramped space was filled with old, forgotten things, dust-covered furniture, broken toys, and cobwebs that clung to their faces and clothes. But the attic offered no escape, only a single, small window that was too high to reach. "We're trapped," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "There's no way out." The whispers in the house grew louder, more insistent, as if the spirits were closing in on them. The air in the attic grew colder, and the ghostly figures began to materialize, their pale faces twisted in anger and sorrow. "They won't let us leave," Jake said, his voice hollow. "We're going to die here." "No," Sarah cried, shaking her head. "We can't give up. There has to be a way out." But even as she spoke, the window in the attic shattered, and a gust of icy wind blew through the room, extinguishing their only light. The shadows seemed to come alive, wrapping around them, pulling them apart, isolating them from each other. Each of them felt the cold touch of death as the spirits of the house took their revenge, feeding off their fear and despair. Tom was the first to fall, his screams echoing through the attic as he was dragged into the darkness. One by one, the others followed, their terrified cries cut short as the spirits claimed them, their bodies disappearing into the shadows. In the end, only Sarah remained, huddled in the corner of the attic, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers were all around her now, deafening in their intensity, filling her mind with visions of the horrors that had taken place in the house of the family that had been trapped here, just as they were, and of the countless others who had met their end on the Devil's Highway. The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her was the voice of the woman, whispering in her ear, "You shouldn't have come here." And then, there was nothing. The next morning, the A3 highway was shrouded in an eerie calm. The fog had lifted, revealing the winding road as it stretched out into the horizon, seemingly normal under the light of day. But for the group of friends who had ventured onto the Devil's Highway, there was no morning, only darkness, silence, and the cold grip of the spirits that claimed them. Days later, a search party was organized after the friends' families reported them missing. Their abandoned car was found on the side of the A3, the doors open, and the interior eerily untouched. But there was no trace of the teenagers, no sign of a struggle, and no clue as to what had happened to them. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air, swallowed whole by the cursed road. The house they had encountered, if it ever existed, was nowhere to be found. The searchers combed the area but found nothing but dense forest and empty fields. The only thing they discovered was an old, weathered sign half buried in the underbrush. Its faded letters barely legible, turned back. The disappearance of the group added yet another chapter to the dark legend of the A3. Fueling the stories of the haunted highway, locals whispered of the spirits that lingered there, waiting for the next unwary traveler to claim. The road became a place of fear and superstition, avoided by those who knew its history. To this day, the A3 remains a mystery, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurs, where the past refuses to rest, and where the spirits of the Devil's Highway continue to haunt those who dared to travel its cursed path. And as for Jake, Emily, Sarah, Tom, and Lisa, they became a part of the legend, their names forever etched in the annals of the haunted highway. But their fate, like so many others who traveled that road, remains a chilling mystery, a warning to those who might be tempted to follow in their footsteps. If you found yourself holding your breath, heart pounding as you read about the horrors of the Devil's Highway, you're not alone. The story of Jake, Emily, Sarah, Tom, and Lisa is a chilling reminder of the unseen dangers that lurk in the shadows, waiting for those who dare to wander too far into the unknown. Have you ever had an experience that sent shivers down your spine? Maybe a ghostly encounter, a strange noise in the dead of night, or an unexplainable event that left you questioning what's real. We'd love to hear your stories. Share your own tales of terror in the comments below and let others know they're not alone in their fear. And if you're still craving more spine-tingling tales, don't forget to check out another scary true story from our channel, Phantom Stories. Remember, the next time you're on a dark, lonely road, think twice before you ignore the warnings. You never know what might be waiting for you just beyond the headlights.